hopefully the best Watchmen podcast on the internet. I am your host, Baylor Thornton, and I'm joined by my friend today, TG Lynn.
Hey everybody, how's it going?
Now, we met at Austin College, and I invited you on this show because there are certain things regarding the subject of this show that I don't want to be the only one to speak on,
Right,
which
okay.
is which people were not expecting when this show aired because Watchmen was something that they always flirted with making a TV show out of, and nobody knew it would be like this. Because as good as the Watchmen comic book is, it is something that very much appeals to white nerds and has for like 3 decades. To make it
Yeah.
about black people was a really ballsy move.
It definitely threw me off when I first watched it. I wasn't expecting that, but I thought it was a really nice turn. I thought it made for a really interesting twist, given everything that's been going on here just with 2020 alone.
Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting that they came out with that. It wasn't even before 2020 happened either, when the first episode aired. So
So it happened
it
like before 2020, yeah. And
man,
why?
call it an accurate prediction or something. I don't know. But
This is
yeah,
your first time you've ever seen anything Watchmen related, right?
this is the first time I've seen the movie. I've watched the movie. I've watched the director's cut, and after watching the director's cut, I went and got the comic, read up on the comic. I think I've looked at it twice in a row. I remember just pouring over it and then re-watching the director's cut. And by far, even with everything that's happened post Watchmen in the MCU, Watchmen has got to be my favorite epic as far as heroes are involved, or in this case, anti-heroes. So it's come to show a lot about society and how we react to different things. So making Knight the protagonist of the show was a real huge change for me, and seeing the context in her being a black masked cop or a black vigilante, to me, I thought was incredibly profound in today's racial tension, racial atmosphere.
Oh, totally. Because, the comic book published in the 80s was about the Cold War, and it only makes sense to adapt it to current issues. Like, and they did a current issue that is actually relevant. Like, it wouldn't make sense to just do nuclear Armageddon again because that's not so much a factor right now. But supremacy still is, certainly.
And while it might not even be Armageddon or anything else, it still has that, because you can feel it even back in 2019, this whole, possible end of the world. What is everybody going to do about it? Kind of feel from people around us. This year 2020 has only come to, I think, show that off even more. Mm-hmm. And seeing it on the show, seeing it being, I want to say, calling it predicted on the show, really helps create that reaction of shock from seeing it adapted like this.
Right. And they've been flirting with making Watchmen TV shows since the 80s. And Damon Lindelof, who created Lost and The Leftovers, another great show, he was offered the show multiple times throughout his career because he has seemed like such a prime candidate. And Watchmen is his favorite comic book, so he kept on saying no. He didn't want to. He just didn't want to touch it. It wasn't until he started reading Ta-Nehisi Coates especially Between the World and Me and The Case for Reparations, to where he got this
Mm-hmm.
idea to hire a bunch of black artists and actually just make it about them, because The Case for Reparations is this really great essay he wrote for The Atlantic, and it's just about this, like this really long like chronicle of just all the different types of black suffering and how reparations should be taken seriously and how it's not as harebrained as we tend to think it is. Because
Mm-hmm.
before this essay was published, like white people kind of tend to think of it as a joke, like the Dave Chappelle "I'm rich, biatch" sort of thing. But Ta-Nehisi Coates like brought it back into the public conscious and all this other stuff that has only gotten more and more attention throughout the past few years. So
Yeah, Ta-Nehisi Coates is actually somebody that I've been looking into myself lately, um, trying to get into, trying to break into, just becoming a writer, trying to develop that career. I was
mhm,
looking into a lot of other black artists, black authors
mhm,
to model myself after, and Coates was one of the first people that showed up for me.
mhm,
So it's interesting to see that he's influenced something like modern day Watchmen or a
yes,
modern day Watchmen series. It means a lot. I think it's pretty awesome.
mhm, certainly. And he's written comic books before, like he did a whole run for Black Panther. So I
Mm,
wouldn't be surprised if they reach out and to him to do a season two. That would be one that I would actually want to see.
that'd be incredible. I'd love to see it too. I didn't know that he had his hands in the comic books like that before. I'd only heard about him in talks of black authors. I didn't know that he had dipped into comics.
No, he did. He did. So, first scene of the show, the Tulsa
Mm,
Massacre, something that actually happened. Did you
mhm.
know about this? Or, because I
I,
didn't.
I knew something of it. Um, they were. I remember hearing about something like a Black Wall Street where black people thrived economically, um, socially. There wasn't as much problems as there are in different parts of America, and it was a thriving black community. And I do remember hearing about it being basically burnt down.
Yes.
I never knew anything about the location or anything like that. I knew it was back in the first half of the 20th century, but I never really knew exactly when either. So to see that recreated, it was um, it was pretty huh, it was pretty shocking at first for that to have been the very first thing for me to have watched. But I found myself really happy about the I'm forgetting his name already, but he's the grandfather,
Oh,
Abar's grandfather. Seeing how his father was treating everything and how him and the wife were choosing to watch after their son more so than themselves. That's something that you see in films all the time. People take care of their kids, send them off. But it's not every day that you see a black father taking that kind of initiative. And
mhm,
it's good to see that reminder that black fatherhood is a very strong, very reinforcing. It helps teach you a lot. And I was glad to see it, seeing that and how he was able to, I suppose, model how he went on living his life with the black and white film that he was watching in the theater.
yes.
And turns out doing the same thing his hero was doing.
Yeah, because that sort of goes into like the origins of the whole superhero thing. I mean, like,
Hmm.
because westerns and like samurai movies kind of were the precursor to all of that.
Hmm.
Alan Moore, even though he has nothing to do with this show, he's been very critical of the superhero genre, and he straight up called Birth of a Nation, the first superhero movie, in which this whole show kind of goes into this whole dynamic of having superheroes be these white supremacists with the, as you see with the 7th Cavalry and the dollar bill ad and all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so with this Tulsa scene, it was a really gutsy move to take something that actually happened and was intentionally obscured by history. Like, this is something they should teach in schools, but they just don't on
Mm-hmm.
purpose. And just make it the first scene, like this cornerstone event of this blockbuster TV show they knew everyone would watch.
Yeah, I definitely thought it. I was curious to see how they were both going to tie in at first. The black and white film definitely helped give an idea for how it was going to tie in, but I was still curious as to how it was going to tie in with the larger picture. And then when we went after that and went to the modern day, when I'm forgetting the officer's name, but when he pulled over somebody who was affiliated with the 7th Cavalry, I was still just blitzed. I had no idea what was going on. I found myself still trying to make sense of everything, and it wasn't going to happen until the next episode. Me not even fully understanding, because I'm still working on trying to get it now, but getting more and more pieces to run with, understanding how that past has affected their reality.
Right. And one more thing I want to say about the Tulsa scene. You don't notice it at first, but there are some parallels with the Superman story, in that it's about this little boy who gets his world destroyed and he's sent off in a pod. Like, even on the soundtrack, the score for that scene is called Orphans of Krypton. So that's hinting that this little boy will be the first superhero.
That's pretty awesome. That's pretty cool. See, that's not bad at all. I was looking into, and I probably should have looked into some more, but watching the credits, I saw some pretty interesting names that popped up as far as the score was considered. I didn't.
Because Ross, 9 Inch Nails themselves.
Mm-hmm. And I was listening, watching the episodes. You hear it, and it's like, this definitely sounds like Trent Reznor, 9 Inch Nails. It's got that kind of influence. And it's like, most definitely see their names in the credits. I thought it was a really interesting mix.
Mm-hmm. So then we get to that police scene, the first scene in modern day, and you see that they still drive electric cars, because that's the thing with the Watchmen universe, and we see that the black cops wear these bright yellow Watchmen yellow masks to protect themselves, or at least that's what they're told. And he's pulling over this racist, and you see that he has a Rorschach mask in his glove compartment as contraband. So that already tells us that following the publication of Rorschach's journal, he has become this martyr and patron saint for this whole cult of racists. Which
it was an interesting development. I never would have imagined. Well, looking into a lot of Rorschach's commentary throughout the diary, it doesn't entirely surprise that he invites some a group like white supremacy, but it's just not something that you imagine. You would imagine that other people would have personally, because Rorschach to me was one of my favorite characters reading the comics and everything. So it's you'd expect some other people. You never would have imagined it belonging to a white supremacy cult who are actively doing what modern day realistic white supremacists aren't doing. Killing cops instead of supporting them. That's another kind of shock. I think that was really just throwing me for a loop, seeing how that's developed.
Right. Like Rorschach is one of the is like the most popular character of the comic book. Like to the point where in the movie he's basically the hero. Like everybody loves him. Yeah,
Yeah.
you actually do read the comic book, you do see this more like bigoted commentary and like how he's a huge fan of the New Frontiersman, which is an extremely problematic newspaper. So when you do take into the lore, it does like lead into this. It does make sense regarding his character. It's just sad to see. Yeah, it
Hmm.
also makes sense considering the type of person that the Rorschach character appeals to, since he's like very much like an incel type hero. Like he's very much something like he's very much a type of character that like movies like Joker, Fight Club, like that kind of guy appeals
Hmm.
to, you know?
Yeah. And hmm I guess it's because I've always been drawn to that type of narrative in the first place. I never, I guess I never really took a realistic look into who else it affects and how it affects them, why it affects them, things like that. I honestly just liked how I found myself in that kind of same gray area that that moral grayscale, you know,
Right.
and it just seems to be, I don't know, it seems to be a much better narrative than, you know, hero goes saves the day because, the typical protagonist's role compared
Right.
to an improvised. It feels like maybe not an improvised role, but an alternate role. I've always been a big fan of the alternate.
Right. I do feel like this show does defend Rorschach in some ways, like not directly, never directly, but you do see visual parallels between him and Angela Abar and Looking Glass at like certain points. So I do feel like he does, like his influence does live on for both the good and the bad in interesting ways.
And I definitely saw a lot of Rorschach in Looking Glass, seeing how just the idea of the mask influenced, I'd say, both sides of this type of war that they're on the brink of starting to wage. Um, it shows a lot that Rorschach in his journal had a huge hold on everybody, I'd say, or it was a universal impact as to what people should look at and as far as justice, what justice should look like, and how somebody who's protecting justice, someone like a Watchman, should go about doing it.
Right. And Um, I would say like this first episode, you may think that it's pro cop just for the narrative and that that's establishing. You may call it propaganda or whatever, but as it goes on, it's even hinted at in the next two episodes that there is more going on than we first think.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
more complicated than it initially lets on. As is with the case with this scene where the cop is trying to get his gun out, but he has to buzz it in due to 30 years of Robert Redford's policy. Like, this is a little bit of liberal trolling because you know that Lindelof loves a little bit of that. I mean, he wrote The Hunt, for fuck's sake. But it's also kind of like this warning that a guy like Redford, if he's president for 30 years, like, sure, he could be a good president, but that's not going to be enough to solve these deeper issues, you know?
Hmm. It
Can't
takes
just have,
bit more.
can't,
What was that?
can't just have, can't just have faith in these institutions if they're rotten to the core, like all the progressive changes are not going to change the institution itself, you know?
It definitely it definitely gave some context, pulling parallels to the modern day. Because I'm sure to the unsuspecting watcher, it would give them some insight as to exactly what a police officer might be doing, how they might be going about um, conducting themselves when it comes to routine stops like that. And the way that it's changed up doesn't exactly, like you said, negate the fact that the foundation that it comes from is fundamentally flawed.
Yes.
And so much so to where the fact that it doesn't even matter if the threat is white and the cop is black or vice versa. The matter of the fact is that, these both of these individuals are feeling in some sort of way immense danger, fear for their life even. And one of them just so happens to be the more gutsier and, take the first shot compared to the other one who didn't have the opportunity to because of things like policy with the
Yeah.
locked gun and everything. It it could turn tragic, and I'm glad that this show kind of points that out.
Right. Correct. So then we get to the Oklahoma scene, the musical
Mm,
Oklahoma. And that goes on with the Watchmen tradition of having all of the titles have all these different meanings because the title of the episode is It's Summer and We're Running Out of Ice. And if you've seen the Oklahoma musical, you know that is from the song Poor Judd is Dead, where Curly tells Judd to hang himself. And sure enough, at the end of the episode, a character named Judd hangs himself.
mm,
So, yeah, that goes
yeah,
with the tradition.
not definitely. I'm honestly, I'm not familiar with the musical Oklahoma, but the fact that that irony that a character named Judd ended out the same way, I thought was. I honestly heard that song at that scene and thought that it was tailored for that scene. I didn't know that it stood on its own before.
Hmm.
So that actually gives a pretty interesting look into it. I it makes me want to go watch the musical.
Right. Both this show and I'm thinking of ending things both feature Oklahoma, so it's sort of having a comeback.
I had a friend of mine tell me about I'm thinking of ending things too.
It's
I've
great.
I definitely want to get into it. I'm still on my own venture when it comes to Netflix and binging, but it's on my list. It's next up on my list.
Yeah, it's odd, but we may have to do a bonus episode on that.
That'd be incredible. I think we should.
Right. Okay, so um next thing we get is the classroom scene where we first meet Angela Abar, and
Mm,
we know that she grew up in Vietnam, like right before it became a state.
mm,
We see the alternate universe very much like correlate with what the comic book set up with the signs in the classroom saying anatomy of a squid and
mm,
four presidents Robert Redford, Richard Nixon, Abraham Lincoln, and George Washington. Like that's all pretty funny to look at. Like this show
mm.
has a good sense of humor. I feel like the movie missed out on that, but this show does get where the book had its humorous elements and satirical elements.
Mm-hmm.
And in this scene, we hear that Angela Abar, she was a cop until the White Knight when she was attacked, and so since then she's been Sister Knight secretly, and
Mm-hmm.
under the guise of owning her bakery shop, it's like her secret lair. And this little shit looks at her and says, "Did you pay for it with rent gradations?"
Man,
Which,
and that didn't take too long for me to understand. It doesn't take a bunch of understanding to get that kind of attitude, understand where that tone was coming from,
mm-hmm,
and that likewise the introduction for Topher,
yeah,
standing up for the woman who took him in like that, his adoptive mother.
yes,
It was pretty awesome. It was pretty awesome to see how. things like childhood, how that doesn't change despite all the different things that you would imagine would have changed how these kids interact with it. It just same behavior, new words.
Right.
So I thought that was really interesting.
Right. Of course, white people are pissed that reparations are a thing. They're constantly protesting out of the center, but we see in the next episode where she goes in to get Will's DNA to see what's going on. She never takes the money. That's never put into focus. Like the reparations center is just there so she can understand where she comes from. I feel like that's a really interesting point that they make with this.
hmm I that must have entirely skimmed over me. Like it very obviously was there, but I don't think I exactly got the significance of it while I was watching it. But it is surprising that, well, it's not entirely surprising, I suppose, but seeing how there are some people who choose to acknowledge something like reparations and not exactly accept it, just use it to, in a sense, understand where they're coming from. A bit of a reminder. Um, I think it's pretty awesome.
And who's to say what reparations actually are? It doesn't have to be a check. It could just be
Mhm.
acknowledging its history and moving forward with it. Isn't that a reparation in of itself, you know?
I think so. When you hear people from other countries in the real world speak about the type of American racism, the U.S. Racism in the U.S., you hear a lot of them kind of, or at least as far as interactions with me has gone. I hear a lot of people say, both sides can just acknowledge it and move forward. I don't see why that's such a big deal. And that's a bit of a PC perspective. It's dicey because a lot of people on both sides are pretty strong headed about this, and for some people it's just not exactly easy to just straight up, oh, forgiveness, or oh, let's just move past it. It's not
Right.
yeah. So seeing someone take a perspective like that in the first place, I think it does give people a bit of perspective, but it's just not a perspective that everybody is familiar with.
Right. And also, it's important to note that if white people say, well, we can't just let's just accept the past and move forward, like they shouldn't say that because they don't know the full extent of the past. Like they may know,
Yeah, they're not. They're
but
accountable for a lot more than some of them. Some white people, I'm sure, could imagine. And I don't like nobody exactly likes to take accountability for the manner of like fucked up things that they do or that their people have done. And so I'm sure it wouldn't tide over easy with a lot of folks.
yeah, it's a whole can of worms to dig into. We've been beating around the bush for centuries now, you know. So then we get the squid fall scene, which if somebody just tuning in for the first time, they have no idea what the hell this is about. But going into, but as a fan, that made me happy because the movie completely omitted the squid bit, but the show said no, it can work on TV. That was fun.
It definitely was threw me for a loop as well. I was curious to see. I was thinking there was some sort of, I don't know. I knew it was a different type of climate than what we know, but for it to have been actual squids, I didn't really understand until they started mentioning the giant squid and everything.
Mm-hmm.
In the third episode, it took me that long for me to process. Oh, squids from the giant squid that landed in New York.
Not really explained until the further episodes because they have to explain it for people who haven't read the comic book. But yeah, just shows the audacity of this, of what they're doing with the setting.
Mhm.
And it's also important to note that after 11.2, technology has regressed, because you saw in the movie and comic book that technology was very much forward in the arrival
Mhm.
of Dr. Manhattan, but since the Squid incident, people have gotten afraid of technology to the point where it's 2019 and nobody has a cell phone or a computer. They still use beepers.
Yeah, that I thought was interesting. That felt like an anachronism for me. Seeing a pager in the same episode that you would hear Future, the rapper Future, and it it's like, what year is this? Reminds that it still is the current day though. There's
Yeah.
a lot of to the person who isn't entirely aware of the universe, such as myself, and everything that's happened from the events in the comic book to this show, it does provide a lot of jarring, um, a lot of jarring perspective changes
Hmm.
um, as far as what you can imagine to see.
Hmm. And another change in the universe is that instead of American Horror Story, the Ryan Murphy series everybody watches is American Hero
Hero
Story
story.
about the Minutemen, which shows this
Mm.
omnipresent nostalgia people now have for superheroes. Now that it's been like 40 years since the Keene Act got placed, and now that's been starting to get repealed in a certain way, having cops legally be superheroes.
It Jumping into that, I don't remember too much about how everything was for a cop to be a masked hero in the um, in the comics, but seeing how that policy has such a profound impact on, in this case, I'd want to say about the police in the show and how very they were very careful to keep their identities protected, and it's also a bit of a workplace benefit to also help keep your identity protected. It makes me wonder exactly how it all ties in. I'm sure it's very obvious for other people who've been a bit more read up on it, but me myself, I'm still left wondering. I see. So,
Well, I'll just say, I'm not going to give it away, but I'll just say, the whole front of protecting identities is actually part of a larger conspiracy. Like, I'll just say it's all rhetoric. It's not what do you think it's going to be. And
okay.
and it's important. And I love how all of the costumes, except for maybe Sister Night, she looks pretty cool, but all of the superhero costumes are super shitty. Like, it all just looks like stuff people will just throw together, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I've kind of noticed with Big Red. I thought that was, man, just find somebody from who's communist and give them all red, or let him find all red. It
And
I thought that was pretty hilarious.
it's interesting to note how 30 years later, a police officer can openly call himself a communist when this is the
Mhm.
same country that elected Nixon 6 times and was utterly terrified of communists. Just shows how much
Mhm.
things can change in certain ways.
What I think, now that you mention it like that, I do give this story, this universe, I'd say, props for just how rapidly America is changing in ideals in that way. Because when you look at when you look at how things exactly went in the past, in the 20th century, you'd imagine that people would be a bit more, how it is in reality today. a bit more slower to make radical changes like that. But in the Watchmen universe, it seems they've constantly polarized,
Yeah,
and I think that's the kind of stuff that provides grounds for growth. So it shows it is honestly proof. It's proof. It's receipt of how much that country itself company how much the country itself has grown.
right.
So
But as we see, some people are left in the past, and that there's these trailer parks with this giant Nixon like idol
yeah.
for them. Fuck Redford spray painted on them. Like
Mhm.
that just shows how some people will never want to move on.
It's there's some things that people feel like that's all that they have, and it's sad to see that just on a personal note, but it's still pretty interesting to remind people that that's not exactly a localized feeling, that it could happen to just about anyone who feels that they've been wronged and would have enough of an argument, enough of a historical context to make an argument for it. But it still feels like hmm, I don't know. I'd want to say it feels like a human thing for you to feel like that after being upset, but maybe there's something from group to group, person to person. It definitely changes, and it's not like that all across the board. But there's
Right,
something together that draws them. Like it could happen to anybody.
right. And I can just imagine a few years down the line there'll be all these trailer parks where people still wave around their Trump flags. I can
Hmm.
easily imagine it just because they feel that was their moment in the sun. They don't want to give it up.
Yeah, they. Oh, let's hope that that doesn't. It might be the case in some places. It might, very realistically, might be the case as soon as he's out of office.
Mhm.
But let's hope that what with the way that things are going current day, that he doesn't become something like what Nixon was to them. Me
No,
personally, I don't want. I hope that mm, hope that
right,
we get to go through some changes like the Watchmen America is.
right. So then we get the video of that the Seven Cavalry sends them, where it's almost identical to the opening monologue that Rorschach gives in the comic book, but it's all replaced by this extremely racist rhetoric. And
Mm-hmm.
as someone who loves the comic book, that made me want to cry. Like when I first saw the show, like yeah, it makes sense, but man, they're taking something I love and just making it terrible, you know?
Yeah, I definitely felt the same way when I watched that. It was a trademark. It was a hallmark quote of his. It's something that you would see in the internet everywhere, um, everywhere where Watchmen content was related, at least, and to have seen that perverted, see it twisted towards white supremacy, I felt different ways about it because while it did hurt to see it, it also felt, I could imagine like anybody who wants to create a radical group like that would just take something like because it could be it is a very radical dialogue monologue in the first place. So it
Oh,
someone just takes it and
you're right.
what's up?
Anything can get appropriated like that. Like you see that with
Mhm.
like medievalism, how that's been appropriated both in the past and in the present to fit the extreme right. So
Mhm.
it's pretty much the exact same thing. That kind of appropriation.
See, I ended up making some notes when I was watching the episodes, and I have something else that I wanted to get onto about. Um, it looks like a lot of it was about Angela Abar and just her personality.
Yeah,
Um, that's a bit more of me being the justice, crime show watcher fan that I am. Things like Law and Order, NCIS, Criminal Minds, things like that. I love seeing how it still comes to play in this show, where we have someone like Looking Glass who, by all means is doing his best to, do things the most effective way, the right way, and still be, I suppose, in some degree fair. Where we have Angela Abar, she knows what needs to be done, and she knows her way of getting those things done. With the interrogation and everything. I
hmm
thought that was, just a cop show fan in me like to see that. I thought that was pretty, 'cause, like this, it's always gonna have its, it's always gonna have its consequences, of course. But when you have something like what we imagine the police force, um, without major reform, there's always going to be that kind of dichotomy of officer.
right.
Um,
And
it's interesting to see.
right, and just like how the original took superhero comic serials and they gave it this radical deconstruction and subversion. This does it
Mhm.
for superhero shows and police procedural shows. So it's just taking that medium and just completely turning it on its head. Considering how both
Mhm.
of those are still extremely popular today, that was a wise decision. And then we get the pod scene with
Mhm.
Looking Glass looking right at this cavalry member and showing him all of these images of Americana, both good and bad, to see where his pupils dilate. And to me, that was an extremely Watchmen-y scene, and because Watchmen has always been like this, confrontation with Americana and the how the appearance of superheroes has shifted it. We see that
Mhm.
the images alone. I thought that was awesome.
I definitely thought that the entire pod scene, the, the pod scene questioning, is what drew, for me, the biggest connection between Looking Glass and Rorschach was because it just, I found myself paying more attention to the line of questioning itself and how he was consistently asking, if he was in or associated with Seventh Cavalry,
Mhm.
and it took me back to Rorschach interrogating Moloch, both in the movie and in the comics. Um, Kind of no BS, straight to the point. You're gonna tell me what I want to ask, or you're gonna answer what I'm gonna ask. Um, I thought it was pretty. I thought it was pretty cool to see something like that carried into something like the pod, where you have all these images, like you said, of just American patriotism and a few more uh, grosser things hiding underneath America's underbelly. All of them in conjunction, in sequence with each other. I honestly thought that the guy that he was interrogating was gonna, show a little bit more crack, crack a little bit more, but he actually stayed pretty on top of it. I thought that was pretty. That must have been pretty trying.
But it
um,
didn't matter because Looking Glass could still tell.
yeah, he was able to look at him just, and it makes me wonder. You know, that must have been what they use. Instead of the polygraph, and that's got to be a much more reliant tool than the polygraph. It might have its holes like the polygraph does, but You can. I'm sure if you know what you're looking for, you can get a more visceral
Right.
uh, analysis of it.
Um, Not to give too much away, but in the fifth episode, you see that Wade's other job is to like look at focus groups for like commercials and stuff and see how they really feel about it. So that sort of talent carries over in that too.
Okay, I'm gonna definitely gonna be watching some more of this after when I get the chance to, because stopping at the third episode was pretty hard. I wanted to go straight into the fourth and keep going, but I know got to parse things out. So I
I
kept it at three. And
yeah
what's up?
watch this as it aired, so try to watch this throughout 9 weeks. That was pretty difficult.
Man, I'm sure that's got. That's always been. That's why I love Netflix and not so much live TV. Just that binging sensation. um, no, I'm very happy that it is the is the whole first season out. I haven't, like I said, I haven't looked too far in. Is the
I own all.
whole first season completed?
Yeah, yeah,
All right,
good.
that's gonna be
Here we go.
a wonderful dive.
All right, awesome. So then we get the cavalry action scene, and then we see that the police uses Dan's Archie design for their like squad cars in the sky, and we see like how like the cavalry members use the suicide pills and the dollar bill ad. Like that's extremely problematic. Like all of these elements
Yeah.
tie into the book, but just give it its own like unique twist with it too.
hmm
And I like how the action scene is only, and all the other action beats are only here to enhance the story. They don't just do it for the sake of it, because that's not what this is about, you know?
hmm And a lot of the times, it feels those action scenes came by unprompted, which a lot of the times, especially watching a TV show or a superhero narrative, you can kind of expect, oh, so, they're going to go into this, and no, I'm sure a huge fight is going to happen. At least for me, it felt more, just surprising. Like when they were showing the actual events of the White Knight,
Right.
you're not going to exactly expect something like that, especially with no heads up that it's a flashback in the first place.
Right.
The just how that action came in definitely helped more than just action for action's sake, which I thought was pretty impressive.
Right. It doesn't feel very choreographed as opposed to the movie, which is all extremely choreographed, and even
Yeah,
in the American Hero story scene, like they do the same like ultra violent Snyder slow mo. That's pretty funny.
it there's a lot of different dynamics that they've adapted from the movie, and I don't know. I guess it's because most of my familiarity with the series comes from the movie and the comics, and more so the visual aspect came from the movies, of course. For me, watching the movies over and over, um, I didn't the way that it translated into a TV series was pretty interesting in that it didn't stay and that it stayed the same with some parts of the series, but with things like the action or it showing in on the relationships between heroes and their pasts together
Mhm.
uh, was really interesting. I thought that was a much better reveal than how it turned out in the movies.
Right. And it's just, if you've read the book, you know it's a 450-page book, mostly about just like world building and flashbacks. Like this is something that's just always going to be better suited for television.
Yeah, true enough. As expansive as it was, I'm that it was made into a TV show, and I'm not entirely surprised that it took this long for it to become a TV show, but I wish it hadn't have taken so long.
I'm
I
glad.
wish we had.
I'm glad
Hmm?
this is the one we got though, because if
Yeah,
anyone it wouldn't have been. It would just been the book again, but no, it's not. They actually did something new with it, which it's interesting how, despite being a new story, that
hmm,
itself makes it a better adaptation of what the book did and a better like expansion of what the book did than just trying to replicate it, you know?
yeah, because it gets you a little, it makes you uncomfortable enough to be a bit more edgier about details,
Mm-hmm.
and that is it's a perfect hook into getting to understand what's actually going on. Um, and it just draws you in even more. If you find yourself constantly getting reeled in, for me, it felt scene by scene.
Right, I agree. Because you can't just be comfortable with a Watchmen book. You have to, like, you can't just see the stuff you already know. That wouldn't be in the same spirit of what Lauren Gibbons did, you know?
You'd want to find you'd want to get into the effects, the cause and effect of the world building itself. You want to see the consequences, what happened from them, what stemmed of them, and like I said before, like I said earlier, just seeing how it all translated into their 2019, compared to our 2019, the real actual 2019 that happened. Um, I don't know. It was a very interesting watch to see, and I'm glad that it was it was taking that route. I'm glad it was taking that route.
I agree. Okay, so want to get into what Adrian Veidt is doing?
Oh man, that was interesting to say the least. I remember listening to the conversation had about him and seeing the newspaper headline,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't have the chance to see the full headline. I saw that he was declared something. They said,
Right.
"Oh, they officially declared him dead." It's like, no, he's not dead. He's doing the Tupac suite. He's out there living his best life, man. But seeing what that best life looks like, though, is it. Me personally, I felt a bit, despite him being, the likely hero, the likely villain at the end of the comic. I found myself pitying him, because at one point he was a hero. He was one of the Minutemen,
Mm-hmm.
and here we are seeing how, all that virtue that he had, how it's kind of twisted into self-aggrandizement. I'd say it's not what you want to see when you see the end of a hero
Right.
or the end of someone who was a hero. I'd say.
Right. It's like Jeremy Irons is hilarious in this series.
Mhm.
Like every scene with him is basically Looney Tunes, and when you see him in this like manor somewhere in this elaborate just like place with all these servants and stuff, like just the way he acts, it's clear he's lost his damn mind. Like killing
Yeah.
has taken a massive effect on his psyche. Just he's just basically this obscene parody of the original character, and how he
Mhm.
just kills all of these seemingly like cloned servants left and right, and like is having all these really hard plans involving like this like astro suit. Like
Mm.
it's all really interesting. It's a great segment for every episode.
And part of me wondered, just seeing how he was going about treating these clones, seeing how he was talking to them, it made me wonder exactly, it they felt a lot like, if you're familiar with Dragon Ball Z, the androids, how
Right.
Dr. Gero intended for the androids to be. It's like, I built you. And, it's like it made me wonder if he had built them himself, or if he had. How did he acquire these lookalikes who, you know, do everything that he says with no problem?
Yeah,
If it was something that he made for
that's
himself. Hmm?
he just murders them at a moment's notice.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that he just treats them like copy paper. It also definitely shows a lot, like you said, about his mental state, that he just GTA's it, you know, that he's living real life GTA. It was something
just
pretty incredible.
rides around on a horse and bites directly into tomatoes. you know, and,
Hmm.
he writes this play and he puts on this play. It's like the origin of Doctor Manhattan,
Hmm.
showing this like clear obsession that he still has with him. And like the war, even the world in general, still pretty much has him because he's like
Yeah,
phone booth that you can talk to Doctor Manhattan. So, and like they show like this like stream of him allegedly on Mars building castles and stuff. So it's like shows like the world clearly misses him after he said he was going away.
yeah. The how they basically made him God in like this kind of uh, post Minutemen society. It was something that was going to happen, I think. Anyway, you just find a being who has omniscience. Of course, people are going to assume that he's God. But one thing that I thought was really interesting is that they kind of make it really ambivalent as to whether or not, you know, he should be addressed as God or a God in some sort of sense. But he's still doing the things that, you know, an everyday Joe would want a God to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like at the end of the third episode when his I don't know why I'm constantly forgetting these names. It's beyond me. But one of his past lovers, the agent,
Oh,
and
Lori.
how she finishes telling the joke and he just drops a car. That's a typical, that's a textbook, God show me a sign, God shows you a sign kind of move. And I thought it was just incredible that we have a giant blue man doing that on Mars.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just say that not to give it away, but there's one episode that takes place on Vietnam, and you see a very different reaction to the whole Dr. Manhattan thing, understandably, considering what he did over there.
Yeah, he did do he did do a Dr. Manhattan in Vietnam. I remember feeling very uncomfortable looking at that in a film, honestly, and just wondering, how, if at all, that rested on his mind at that time. But at this point, he's kind of just he said about his own ways, which the humanity and the mentality of Dr. Manhattan, I thought was something pretty interesting as well, because a lot of people always want to find connections between themselves and deities. And, in the case that he does, or that a deity does just so happen to be someone like Dr. Manhattan, who was a human being before and just turned into something greater than that. It Me personally, I've been on a bit of a spiritual journey, and it speaks a lot to that. The idea of spirituality within the just every other person, the common man.
Yeah, yeah, I feel the same way about the character. There's a lot going on with him that we'll certainly get into later. And, so to go back to the dinner scene, we see that Cal and Angela and the kids. Judd and his wife are sort of like this like major expansive like family following the White Knight, and after a lot of the cops got killed, they've been sticking together. And Judd seems like a cool guy in this scene. He seems like a nice guy, but there's also these like deeper hints that he's more bigoted than he may seem. In that
Yeah,
he mentions he didn't like the it's hinted that he didn't like the Oklahoma production because they're all black actors, and he's listening to conservative radio, and he calls his drivers boys. So it's like
mm,
deeper hints that there's more going on than we think.
it looking into the development of Judd, I found myself really wanting to know more about him, and it's interesting to see how much more you learn about him after he was dead, after he was hung.
Mm-hmm.
But he seemed like I found myself hoping that he was a redeemable character, or if maybe I was wondering if he was already a redeemed character. But the fact that he had, found his way in such a position, to find himself in a family, like you said, a larger family, watching after, another police officer in that sense, that's what everybody wants to see for, like the typical good guy. And here
Mm-hmm.
he is at the end of the first episode. He ends up that dirty sheriff that gets hung, and
Mm-hmm.
it just I think that's another interesting subversion that you don't want to hope for, especially trying to be, looking into seeing so much progression in the first place. But it happens regardless because, it just it's a facet of reality that everything you think isn't what it is.
Yeah, yeah. It could be anybody. You'll know anybody's true worldview until you really get to know them.
Mm-hmm.
No matter how close you are with them. And it's important to know with that murder that ends this first episode that both Watchmen stories both begin with a murder of some kind, and the plot thickens as they figure out who this guy really was, and he's directly hinted at that there's direct parallels with the comedian with how the episode ends with his bloodstained sheriff badge, and how in the next episode, Angela opens the closet like Rorschach did to find a Klansman robe.
Oh yeah, it. I was wondering. I had found myself wondering with an organization or a group like the Seventh Cavalry, if there still were going to be Klan members, and sure enough, seeing all that, it made me wonder if they're one and the same, or if they are separately racist groups. um,
Well, it's all
it,
separate iconography, but it's all it's all under the same umbrella, I'd say.
yeah, absolutely. It's all white supremacist trash.
Right.
It's it provides, for me at least, a a weird look, I'd say, into how something like white supremacy can manifest into uglier things, more publicly uglier things than what the common person could expect.
Right.
Had somebody else found out, had that been public that somebody like Judd was a Klan member, I don't think he would have gotten the same kind of. He wouldn't have even been a part of the family that he was with Cal
That,
and Angela.
yeah,
It.
that same respect, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
But it's all skeletons in the closet.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly what it is. And Angela's grandfather, I thought, was the perfect person to shine that light. And when I found out that, you know, Angela's grandfather was also the same boy from the first scene,
Hmm.
it just makes all the better. And it ties in a lot to learning about, for me, Black identity. Because even in the real world these days, myself and other friends of mine are learning things about our families and learning things about, the people that we share community with. And it's just like, it gives you a bit more insight as to what my role could be or what their roles could be as far as everything for um, justice for Black people looks like today.
Hmm.
So it does call a lot into understanding oneself, especially in the Black community. And I thought that was really interesting because a lot of the time it's going to be in many cases, not even just with Black people, that older person, older family member, maybe a mentor of some sort, they're always letting you know it's like this and this and this is where you came from. This is how that's affected, and not trying to tell you to do anything, but look at where you are now, and think about it, think on it. Um, another interesting little thing that I like to focus on when I was watching it, just seeing how that kind of relationship formed, how she still chose to be the police officer who put him under arrest just for him to go and get rescued, like he said he would. But that just goes to show more about Angela needing to understand where she's coming from, what she can do, what she can't do in that context.
Right. Thank you for saying all of that. That's really great stuff. And the subversion of what the first mystery was like, how it was like this who done it, who killed Edward Blake. Here we know exactly who did it. It was Will, but we know who did it, but we have no idea how or why. Um, Different
Yeah.
questions. Because how could this 105-year-old man in a wheelchair hang a chief of police like he says? Like, that doesn't make sense yet.
I feel like it's got to be how he just up in front said he can manipulate matter. Maybe he does have some sort of superpower. Yeah, I found myself joking about that, and it very likely could be something. You're not entirely sure what to expect, but a lot of the times people have tricks or two up their sleeves anyway.
Hmm.
Who knows what a man in a wheelchair can do? You
Right.
know, in some cases, um, is my screen black on your end?
Um, you're frozen, but I can still hear you.
Okay, that's interesting. Um, I found myself curious though, just to see what kind of. Let me see if I can fix this. Um, that's not good. Let's see. But getting on to uh, Angela's grandfather, you said his name was Will,
Yes.
right? Like I said, I gotta work on getting these names right, man. But I definitely found myself from the very get go curious about what his history is. Seeing where his roots came from,
Hmm.
and the fact that he came to be a descendant of an ancestor of Angela
Right.
Abar.
Right. I'll just
And it looks like my window is just completely froze over.
I'll just say
Uh,
you do know who
hmm?
this guy is later on. In the next batch of episodes we'll be talking about, all will be revealed.
Okay.
Hmm.
Alrighty then. Well, I I think I'm gonna have to head out because I don't. It looks like my computer is starting to just spaz out right now.
Okay.
I don't know what's going on at all.
Okay. I can finish this myself.
Alrighty. Well, let's see. Yeah, nothing is working. um, is it still frozen? Is my screen still frozen on your side?
Yeah, it's frozen, but I hear you just fine.
Okay. Well, maybe we could just keep it up
Yeah,
until the window shuts itself down. We could just do it over call over the voice, I suppose.
I agree.
But um, yeah, I found myself wondering more about the aliens as well, as far as Will was concerned. Seeing what the aliens tied in with all this is about, because I'm not entirely familiar with them either.
You mean
Um,
when he gets shot up into the sky?
yeah, when he gets rescued, or what I assume is rescued.
Yeah, well,
I'm wondering who his friends are.
I'll say they're not aliens, but he does have friends in high places, like he says.
High, high places. Well, it it does make me wonder, and I wonder a bit more about on the other end of Angela Abar's family, uh, Cal and the kids, especially Topher. I
Mhm.
found myself just seeing how he reacts to things like Judd dying, and just the conversation that he had with Angela after her career day talk. I wonder exactly what he's going to develop into.
Because you do see that he does have a bit of like anger issues a little bit, and
Hmm.
how Angela does not try to soothe them at all. She's just like, yeah, you're kind of right.
Yeah, that was that's not exactly how you see most people break news to their kid that like someone close to them has died. And that's typically, even with something like that, that's not typically the way that you see a kid react to it.
Hmm.
you know, he definitely, while there was a bit of an anger issue, I definitely thought I found myself more curious as to how he handled it and the timeliness in which he handled it. How he just went and destroyed this huge project that it looked like he was working on. It must have taken him, hours to complete. And he just, smacks it to the side
Hmm.
after getting some news like that. You know, um, very recently, I had to have dealt with some grief myself, some loss last year, and while I wasn't exactly all over the place, I did see that a lot of the times bouts of anger or bouts of just frustration that shows up like that is coordinated, is calculated, and in a lot of cases justified for reasons beyond just being upset.
Right.
And it part of me was wondering, I feel like Topher probably did that. It's not that grand of a reason, but like he's definitely going to want to find something to distract himself with, and there's nothing better to distract himself with than restarting a project of that size. Might as well go ahead and start from ground one. Go through it all over again. Just try and find something, uh, find something else to put your mind on to. Um, that was just a little connection that I had made watching it, and it made me wonder how exactly he's going to continue dealing with grief in that way.
Right. And it's also interesting how that's the third castle we've seen so far. First, we saw Dr. Manhattan on the stream
Mm-hmm.
building a castle. Then we saw Adrian
Mm-hmm.
in his castle. Then we saw Topher building his Manhattan Lego castle. So they're all like identical. So it's an interesting motif.
I that's it's nice that you pointed that out because I didn't. That completely skimmed past me. Um, I wonder if that has any kind of. I'm sure it's got to imply some sort of significance because there, there's no way that it couldn't. Especially looking at this sort of detachment that Topher has compared to Veidt and Dr. Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. I did find on that note about Veidt, it one thing that I thought was interesting, just jumping back to it, was what you were mentioning with the pills and how they were still very much so a popular cop out for people doing unsavory things,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and or people doing secretive things. They're still unsavory, but they're more so secretive, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and how that's become something. And this is just the initial comic book film person coming out from me, the reaction. Just seeing how that's kind of graduated past Veidt himself and became just it just became a common method. That
Mm-hmm.
and one thing that I thought was interesting, and I think I'm starting to make more sense of it now. I think it might have connection with the pills, but how the people in the cavalry were collecting, how collecting watch batteries
Oh
was a
yeah,
thing.
they wanted the batteries that Manhattan made because they think that synthetic lithium was making people sick. It's just interesting how there's because again they're so afraid of technology, like they outlawed that. And now the cavalry is like stockpiling it.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's one of those secretive things, those secretive, unsavory things that just makes you, I don't know, once makes you want to see the cavalry shut up. I like how the show kind of the show kind of puts that narrative forward. It makes it very easy to receive amongst a lot of things that aren't so easy to receive.
Mhm. Okay. One scene I want to bring up is the opening to this episode, where you see that the "Watch over this boy" was written over a piece of Nazi propaganda that they used to try to appeal to black soldiers, because that's
Hmm.
true. Hitler and the Nazis did try to try to like cherry pick certain elements of Americana that are terribly racist and try to make
Hmm.
Germany seem superior, even though we know that Nazi Germany was just as bad, worse.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I thought was because when I recall after while listening to that voiceover of that, it was a letter, I believe. Listening to the voiceover of that letter, it sounded like some sentiments I had been told about. And with the reasoning and everything, that was very, to me, very very much like what we could have expected from 40s Germany to try and buy over black soldiers, you know,
Right.
because the idea, just jumping back to what I was saying about, say, for instance, Eastern perspectives or maybe old world perspectives on American racism, how they just kind of, I don't see why, people can't just move past it. On the other hand, in what I've read about people who may have had Black American ancestry, but were European natives, or maybe not even Black American history or ancestry, but just Black ancestry in the first place, who are born and raised in places like France or the UK, Black Germans, seeing how they have something that's a completely different life. If they are going against any kind of prejudice, it's not an American kind of prejudice, but more of a, some Europeans are just jerks kind of prejudice. It I'm sure that it must have been a very popular argument for them wanting to try and get more people on their side.
Oh yeah,
And,
yeah.
it wasn't going to work in the first place. I don't think anybody, well, let me not say that I'm not that familiar with World War II history, but I think I could speak for myself, friends, and family when I say that not too many Black Americans would have wanted to done that in the first place, you know.
Right.
But that's just to me, a more complex issue as far as Black patriotism, and how Black patriotism isn't exactly like regular patriotism, but it's still a type of patriotism nonetheless.
Hmm. I just think it's interesting how Will and his father before him all held on to this piece of propaganda because it speaks to them, even though the origins of it are very much problematic. Like
Hmm.
like that, it's almost like the origins don't even matter because it's sort of like hinting at this deeper truth that no American piece of literature really has for
Yeah.
them.
And it honestly, looking into that, as an aspiring author and as a just a fledgling writer, I find myself really interested to tap into a truth like that, or maybe adjacent truths about what it means to be Black in America, and why it's better to do something like that than to start over in a place, say, like Europe or Asia, Japan, China, take your pick. um we've already, despite what the history looks like, all of our history has been in America. And, you go anywhere else, you're going to be separated from that, just as, the people who were brought here were separated from their initially African roots. Um, Outside of what we know, or outside of what I know about, Black American identity, there's not much more that I can find myself fitting into, personally. It's just, there's some other things that I've kind of, found myself, I suppose, assimilated into. Going into high school, I was around a lot of Latino people. It was a majority of Latino school. So I found myself appealing to Latino culture. There's some things, as I said before, I'm real into alternative lifestyle. So that takes a huge impact into the music I listen to: alt rock, alt hip hop, alt pop, anything as long as it's alternative. Um, and it just seems like this concept of, I suppose, otherness. A lot of people talk about otherness, and it feels like a lot of what I've worked with in my life belongs so much more to that otherness than, mainstream identity. Um, it just draws me in. Every little piece of it kind of just draws me in.
Right, right. I certainly feel like the mainstream isn't for me either.
Mm.
So next scene I want to talk about is the raid on Nixonville. because the first episode was sort of pro-cop, sort of like
Mhm.
establishing that more like expectation that we see in most media. These next two episodes are where it sort of turns on that because they raid on Nixonville and force everybody to go into these trucks just completely unprompted. And we see in
Mhm.
the next episode that they're all in this like detention center and like getting like with like attack dogs, like being threatened with these dogs and like other forms of violence. Like we see that the police get away with way too much, and
Yeah.
that they're really not far off from what they're actually fighting.
And that's one of the things that I thought was it's nice seeing that kind of parallel, because it's often scenes like that show the most about where we're from here in the real world, because it's some of the same, bureaucratic red tape, some of the same, technicalities, legal technicalities that these officers operate on that have real life officers get away with what they do. You know, it's things such as like likely suspicion or known associations, things like that that just allow that allow officers to just run into a community and disrupt it. Whether the community is a trailer park or it's some sort of barrio or anywhere. It could be anywhere, so long as the police feel that they have sufficient reason to target it. Um, and even seeing, like I said, it just ties back into that idea what you were mentioning before. Having an institution, despite all the radical changes that it's gone through, it's still that same sort of institution that it's always been.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in desperate need of restructuring, not even reform in some cases, but just, start from scratch, make something accustomed to the modern day way of things.
Mm-hmm. I agree, and we'll see more of this police corruption further on. And
Mm.
last thing I want to say about this episode is the party that Angela finds herself in at Judd's house, and we see Keen Jr., who's like the rising candidate to take on Redford on the conservative end. So we see that of course, the Keens, as um, influential politicians as they are, they've become this dynasty. When
Mm.
we learn more about them, these further episodes, that's just very problematic. How they just get away with anything just because of their family name.
Mm. It That's another parallel I feel. It's also just, I think, a larger note about politics and how people react to politics, to politicians as well. If somebody's going to hear, a name, of course they're going to think a certain thing, and depending on how they feel about that, they're going to be for or against that person or family. Um, I, Me personally, I don't know enough about everything. I'd say to have a political, to have a politician to root for in this case. But the fact that Redford was running office for 30 years already
Mm-hmm.
definitely has, I think, an equivalency to, an elite running against him, a political elite running against him.
Yeah, certainly. So move on to the last episode of the bunch. She was killed by space junk, which is the
Mm-hmm.
big Lori episode. If you weren't convinced the show had enough to do with the original, you're in luck here because here we see Jean Smart playing an older version of Lori. We catch up what she's been doing for the past 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked her characterization here because she very much like it gets into that disillusionment and sarcasm she has with the whole superhero thing. And
Mm-hmm.
and I love how she now goes by Lori Blake rather than Lori Uspetsik. And like rather than modeling her personality after her mom like she did when she was younger, she now models it after Eddie Blake. Now that she knows that was her father.
Yeah. It I loved seeing her throughout that episode. Just seeing, her being the the reckless special agent, reckless detective, that kind of just takes things risky, takes things grabs the bull by the horns, and
Mm-hmm.
is still very much so uh I want to say almost openly broken
Mm-hmm.
from the past. You know, to somebody who looks hard enough, and understands into, how she reacts to her actions and how she reacts to the actions of others. It seems to me the kind of understanding that comes from uh, profound hurt. It's just one of those things that opens you up to learn more and to become more. I think show more of yourself, and seeing how she's developed into that, especially into this current reality, I think was something incredible.
Right. And you see that she's clearly lost a lot because Dan is nowhere near to be seen in this show. They just mentioned that he was thrown in jail after they got busted crime fighting. And the only reason why Lori's not in jail is because she works for the FBI now, capturing other vigilantes. So it's clear that she's lost a lot. And
Yeah,
this there's a little bit of nostalgia in her character too, in that she has that pop art mural of all the crime busters, and she still listens to Devo, and she has
yeah, man.
and
I'm
she
sorry.
a, that's okay. And she has a big blue dildo because she still has the hots for Dr. Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Man, I. It's interesting to see who someone who isn't that openly reminiscent go to their home, and you see how actual, like how reminiscent they actually are.
Yeah.
It makes you and I'm sure, like, it makes perfect sense. I suppose why you wouldn't want to, why you couldn't show that those types of feelings, as you're just going out and about, especially when you're such a high profile uh, character such as Lori, um, taken after the role of your mother and still being afterwards a very fundamental figure, very fundamental role in the idea of law enforcement, of capturing criminals, and doing doing the deed as far as uh, the justice is concerned.
Yeah, we see it.
And,
Oh, sorry.
mhm.
We
No,
see
go ahead.
we see that she plays hardball too because she staged
Mm,
that whole bank robbery, and when
yeah,
when the superhero guy doesn't catch on, she straight up shoots him in the back. Just doesn't even care. She just wants to do her job because that's all she
yeah,
really has anymore.
man. And when I first saw that, it didn't. To me, it came off as a lot more of a. It was the perfect way to show off, this colder, much noticeably colder side of Lori than what she. And thinking about her, I think about the actress in the movie. You
Mm-hmm.
know, because I think she characterized Lori pretty well. The how much colder she's gotten, which is, it's got to be a thing of just experience, especially living in that kind of a role. Uh, the kind of coldness that it requires for her to continue playing, for her to continue doing her job like that,
Mm-hmm. Right.
and how she can just switch. I find that personally to be like me. I guess it just shows a lot about my sense of humor. I found it funny how she is so easily able to just switch back and forth from that to this, you know, this somewhat easygoing, you know, doesn't take things serious kind of attitude that she's had.
Right.
Um, I was really glad to see that she maintained that kind of personality throughout the entire time. Because I remember even um, reading the comic, watching the film, that I was afraid that she was going to lose it even then. You know, seeing how she reacted to things, but she never did, from the looks of it.
I mean, she puts on this facade to model herself after her dad, and like have like this like very like um misanthropic view of the whole superhero thing. Yet, yet the framing device of the episode is she's in that phone booth trying to call Dr. Manhattan, and it's this like elaborate like Pagliacci-esque joke chronicling how she feels about everybody, and by the end she's crying. So clearly she still has feelings about for John and Dan and all this other stuff. She just doesn't want to let it out.
Hmm. Which is also understandable. When you have such huge people, and not physically. Well, I guess in Dr. Manhattan's case, actually, but just people who are so prominent, and to have them be closer to you than you actually think or actually would have imagined to have been. I'm sure, like I said about with just showing that willingness to be reminiscent. That same from that same, I suppose, energy, that same attitude. I'm sure she doesn't want to admit to herself how much of an impact those events still had on her 40 years after, decades after the matter of the fact. But, you know, it'd be nice to have seen. It'd have been
And
nice to have
also,
seen.
her partner throughout this whole episode is Petey. This introduces Petey, who is this huge nerd for all the superhero stuff. He'll just throw
Mm-hmm.
like factoid regarding it at a moment's notice, and just embarrassing everybody else. And even when they have sex, he's wearing a huge superhero mask. So it's something very odd about this guy, and it only gets weirder as it goes on.
Well, I definitely knew that from me personally. I got that kind of feeling from him when he made it. Wasn't too big of a shift, but it was subtle and nuanced enough to note for me how he kind of did go from fanboy to I'm not a fanboy during the airplane flight, the scene on the plane where he just gave her his entire background of like, don't treat me like some type of fan. Although maybe that, I feel like that was some sort of a pride holding him back type of
Right.
thing.
He's just
Because
trying
I
to
know in a lot of instances, yeah, I feel like a lot of times, somebody who is that accomplished behind things like that would very openly say, it's like, yeah, I'm a huge fan. So what? What are you going to do about it? And still, but I suppose he also wanted to try and angle for a certain amount of respect from her as well. So, he's definitely an interesting case just for his fascinations alone. And I'll definitely be keeping an eye out for him in the later episodes.
And they made this episode. I mean not an episode. They made this website that you could go on. It's like an ARG type thing called PDpedia, and it just shows you all this like in-universe text regarding what's been going on in between the comic book and this show. Sort of like how the original comic book had all of these in-universe texts at the end of every chapter. So I liked how they
Mm.
went the extra mile and went ahead and did that. And
I'm honestly still really.
oh, okay. Thank you. Think he's out. So, all right, one more. All right, so I'll just bring up a few more things and we'll wrap up the episode. So they have this conversation. Lori and Senator Keene have this conversation, and in doing so, Lori is already kind of convinced that DOPA, the mask cop deal, the mask cop law, was a bad idea. She's saying, well, what was the point in putting everybody in masks? Doesn't that just obscure who's good and who's bad, who's racist and who isn't? And as we see on, yeah, that actually was the point. It is this larger conspiracy. And but yet, it's considering how Keene can get Dan out of jail. Lori wants to go along with it because what else is she gonna do? And towards the end of this episode, Lori and Angela have this conversation together about just like both like sort of on edge since there's clearly this tension between the two. Their goals are entirely different because they all just know certain things that the other ones don't, and it's a great scene because they're both right. There's no clear like antagonist in this moment, you know, like Lori has her prerogatives and how she wants to get Dan out of jail and how she's going to lead this investigation, while Angela knows that Will did the murder, and she just wants to know why, and like she wants to go down this trail that Will has set up for her. So they're both right. There's no like it's really there's no way you can like just take one point of view. You have to root for all of them. That's a really great like Watchmen-y scene, I'd say. And just like Watchmen, original Watchmen, and The Leftovers, this is the first episode that focuses entirely on one character. This was the Lori show. And I'm going to say right now that the next three best episodes, 5, 6, and 8, also just purely revolve around one character. Just like original Watchmen, that's the bread and butter of this series. So yeah, amazing show. I fucking love this show. It's maybe my favorite show ever, and it's only going to get better from here. So see ya. Please follow along.